Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining me. I can see the participant number slowly increasing as people join. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We've got a fantastic hour. Am I allowed to use the word fantastic alongside a GDPR webinar? I'm not sure, but that's how I feel about today. There's no volume. Oh dear. Is that the case for everybody? Please just drop me a... Oh, okay. So thank you everyone for confirming that you sound good. Robert is now okay. Good. So as I was saying, we have a fantastic webinar coming up for you. And I was saying, I'm not sure if you can use the word fantastic and a webinar about GDPR in the same sentence, but oh, Sam, my assistant's just joined. Actually, Sam, if you could just take your video off and mute yourself for now, because otherwise it keeps flashing to you rather than me, that would be great. Okay, and thank you very much. Okay, so welcome, welcome if you're just joining us. Thank you so much for joining us live. I think it's always better to join live, isn't it? Because we all have the best of intents. We sign up for webinars, we think, well, I'll watch the recording, and how many of us actually do? So well done, you guys, for actually coming on live. And of course you get the chance to ask questions as well. Thank you, Louise, for saying you like my map. So do I. It's from IKEA. It's very cheap and it makes the UK look huge in comparison to other countries. The UK is literally the size of Russia because they've done the latitudes wrong, but it's good for the kids to give them a general idea where things are. Okay, so we'll just wait for some the stragglers to join. I think we're nearly at 12:30. And then we'll kick off. I think a prize has to go to Eric for joining us from Colorado at 6:30 a.m. in the morning. So well done to you for your commitment for being here. Well done. Good. Well, nice to see everyone introducing themselves in the chat box. You're ahead of me. I hadn't actually asked you to do that, but well done. For those of you who are joining from overseas, I can see someone's from Cyprus and Norway. From Texas, from the Isle of Man, Scotland, Honolulu at 2:30 a.m. Seriously? My word, that is dedication. New York, actually no, that wasn't New York, that was York. Nearly as glamorous as New York. Sunny Cornwall, Spain, Southend-on-Sea, garden. I like that, fantastic. Well done you for being in the garden. Super, okay, well let's make a start because we've got a lot to cover in the space of an hour. So I'm going to load my slides up. You're not going to see me the whole time. Let me share my screen. Okay, so hopefully you can see my slides. Please do let me know if you can't see them. That would be good. I'm going to go off video now so that I'm not distracting from the slides. Let me stop my video. Okay, let me see your, where's your chat box gone? Here we are, chat, like seeing what's going on in the chat. Okay, now, good, I'm glad you can see the slides. That's all. The technological side is always half the battle, isn't it? So, today we are talking about, is GDPR over? 12 months on, does GDPR matter anymore? Now, of course, if we cast our minds back nearly 12 months now to the run-up, it was probably, I'd say, certainly the end of February, March and April, where GDPR was really in all of the press. It was all people were talking about at business networking meetings, and there was a real sense of almost panic, I would say, in the small business community. Many people hadn't heard of it and realised that they had weeks to go and thought there was a huge uphill mountain to climb or they would be fined 20 million euros. And there was a lot of scaremongering going on about the level of the fines. There was, you know, obviously it's a very complex regulation. People didn't know what they were doing. And I actually set up my Facebook group on the 28th of February, February 2018. And for those of you who are in the group, you'll have seen that grow to, I think we were up to about 37,000 at our peak, it's now dropped down to about 35, which is still, you know, still, and what is interesting actually is that more and more people are joining every day. We're still getting about 100 requests, well, probably 200 over the course of a week, actually even maybe more. So people are still, it's maybe still something new to people, or maybe they've not done the work that they need to do, but it's certainly, there's certainly small businesses are still interested in GDPR. But I also get a sense from my group and from when I go to conferences about GDPR and when I speak to people, small businesses particularly, that there is this sense that GDPR is over. So hence this webinar today. So let's delve in and see you know, whether it actually is over or not. And I hope you know that, and I'm sure that's why you're in my group and you're on the webinar. I hope you know that I am not one of these scaremongering lawyers. You know, I was one of the first that came out, and I think the reason that my group grew so quickly was because I was saying, look, there is no chance on earth that you, as this very small business that's not doing anything too complicated with your data, and you're being generally respectful to people's data, there is no way on this earth that you're ever going to get fined 20 million euros, or indeed probably fined at all. And I hope that I was the voice of reason in that GDPR dialogue around that time. But my point of view has always been that compliance doesn't need to be complicated, and that there are a few simple steps that you can take that will put all issues of complaints, investigations, penalties, fines, that will put all of that out of the question. And for me personally, I'm a small business owner myself. You know, if there are very small things you can do to eliminate the risk, then personally, I'm all in favour of that. So today, this webinar is going to be focusing on ongoing compliance as well, because I know a lot of you made the effort back in May, and then it's become a sort of out of sight, out of mind part of your business, which I totally relate to. But we're going to look at ongoing compliance and really the very small things that you need to be doing to make sure that you continue to comply. So let's get into the slides. Let me just check this is recording, because that would not be good if it's not. Yep, good. Okay, so slides, right. Oh yes, so some housekeeping. For those of you who've been on my webinars before, you'll know all this. For those of you who haven't, then do turn off all distractions. Really is a waste of an hour for you if you're not going to concentrate. So don't look at your email and Facebook. Grab a pen and paper, because there's always some very actionable stuff that you can take away from my webinars. I don't know about you, but if I don't write it down, it's in one ear, generally out the other. Get yourself comfortable, get a drink. I don't recommend a stiff one at this point in the day, but you know, maybe a stiff coffee like we were having in Colorado. Do concentrate and take notes. I love that people use the chat box freely, but on some of my webinars, we have had the case where the chat box has taken over control of the webinar, and you have people who are in the audience answering other people's questions, setting hairs running, etc. So if you have a question, then do please use the Q&A box, which is different to the chat box. It means that I'll be able to make sure that I see your questions and answer them, rather than having to work out which are questions from the chat stream. So use the Q&A box for that. And finally, if we have internet problems, which we have been known to do, and the connection goes off, just click the link, the same link again, to join the webinar, by which point hopefully we will have sorted it out. Okay, so I want to start off with a poll before we get into the detail. I want you to vote, and there is, hopefully you can see the polling icon at the bottom of your bar there. Is GDPR over? I want you to, now let me launch this poll. And you've got some very simple answers. You've got yes or no, okay? So I'm going to launch that poll. If you can press yes or no. I mean, just seeing the numbers going up there, this is a bit of a skewed webinar, isn't it? because clearly, if you think it's over, you're not going to be spending an hour on my webinar. But what I'm hoping, and yeah, the poll has actually demonstrated that quite nicely. Only three people think that GDPR is over. A whopping 98% think that it's not over. Now, I suspect that if we took that out to a wider audience, the numbers would not at all be in those proportions. So I am going to be sharing with you some feedback that I've had from small businesses, and do feel free to share in the chat box at that point your own, not necessarily your own views, but certainly senses that you have from maybe being at networking meetings or talking to other small businesses, what you feel their approach is to ongoing compliance to GDPR. But wait, don't launch off in the chat box on that now. We'll wait for the appropriate point to do that. Okay, thank you for entering that poll. I'm going to end that now. Oh, and I'll share the results. There you go. So 98% think it's not, and 2% think it is. And the four of you that do think it's over, I would actually love you to share in the chat box, if you're brave enough, why you think that is. That would be very helpful. Okay, so here's what we're going to be covering. You've seen it in the emails and on the Facebook group, so I'll whiz through this. It's exactly what I promised you we'd be covering, surprisingly. Right, now I'm sure that the vast majority of you already know who I am. I keep this photo of me up here, even though it is about a good sort of 15, 20 years old. Because I've got no wrinkles really, and I quite like being reminded of that point in my life before kids. But that was when I was working with Richard Branson at Virgin, and I led a group-wide data protection project for them, as a result of which I was nominated for and subsequently was runner-up in Solicitor of the Year. My most exciting thing at the moment is I'm halfway through writing GDPR for Dummies, the Wiley branded Dummies guides. I'm writing that at the moment. Who knew how hard writing a book is? It's an absolute killer when you've got to squeeze it in alongside everything else. Can I close the poll view? Can you still see the poll, or have we gone back to the slides? I thought I had done that. Let me know if you can. Let me know if you can see the slides again now, please. So yeah, so who knew? Oh, thank you for confirming it's gone. Who knew writing a book was so hard? But my GDPR for Dummies book will be coming out later this year. Hugely excited about that. So keep an eye out for that. Right, the overview. Okay, so it's been nearly 12 months since GDPR came into force. I'm sure you all know it was the 25th of May 2018. And I went to a conference in London recently. It was an IAPP conference where there were a number of representatives from the ICO there, and they gave a number of very interesting talks. The ICO is the Information Commissioner's Office, which is the regulatory authority in the UK. And so they actually gave a talk on 12 months on from when GDPR came into force, and let us know what actions they've been taking over the past 12 months. And so this is really from that talk, feeding back to you guys what the ICO said. So not surprisingly, complaints increased significantly. In the last 12 months, the ICO have received 94,000 complaints. And you know, the reason for that is that, you know, I was quite surprised when I set up my Facebook group about how little data protection knowledge there was amongst small businesses. Because out of the GDPR, I'd say only probably 10% of it, maybe 20% is new. The vast majority of it was based on existing data protection regulations. But because we hadn't had the press about it, the media attention, the headline fines, obviously, you know, the fines going up to 20 million euros was a big headline for businesses and for individuals. Individuals are now much more aware about their data protection rights. And when companies don't respect those, they are much more likely to complain. So complaints have increased significantly. The Irish Data Protection Commissioner, which is one of the first to release their figures for 2018, reported a 56% rise in complaints. And also breach reports increased significantly. They went from 7,000 to 36,000 a year. And again, the reason for that, there were probably that many breaches before GDPR came into force, but now obviously with the increased focus on it and the increased fines, companies are much more likely to be reporting breaches, and indeed probably over-reporting, and by that I mean reporting things that they don't necessarily need to report. But I think that's a good sign in that businesses are aware of their obligations and are choosing to report and cooperate with the authorities rather than trying to hide it. Yes, Lucas, I've just seen your note. Yes, I know about the Polish Data Protection Authority, quite a big fine. I'm going to come on to that later when we do an overview of fines in Europe. So thanks for raising that. 55 million euros in fines have been levied across the EU under the GDPR. Now, obviously, 50 million of that was the big Google fine that CNIL, the French Data Protection Authority, recently imposed on them. So 5 million in fines other than that in the last 12 months. But you might think, well, that's not as high as you would have expected, given the levels of compliance and the increased fines. For those of you who don't know, I'm sure it's hard doing these webinars now because I know that most of you will absolutely know what I'm talking about. But for those of you who don't, the fines were hugely increased with GDPR. They went up to 20 million euros or 4% of global turnover for the last 12 months, whichever is higher. So obviously for the big tech players like Google and Facebook, their fines are potentially in the billions. But Google were fined 50 million by the French Data Protection Authority. And there's been 46 decisions since GDPR came into force. So, not a bad number, probably not as many as I would have thought there would have been in the 12 months, but there are a lot that are in the pipeline, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. So the ICO have published their regulatory action policy, and that is a document that sets out the ICO's chosen approach to regulatory action. And they very much take a risk-based approach to regulatory action. They say we'll be as robust as we need to be in upholding the law, whilst ensuring that commercial enterprise is not constrained by red tape or concerned that sanctions will be used disproportionately. And I think the key words there are, will be as robust as we need to be, whilst ensuring that commercial enterprise is not constrained, which is probably what we want of a regulator, isn't it, really? And we'll come on to that in a bit. But this document sets out the nature of the ICO's various powers in one place and is clear and consistent about how they will use them. And we'll come on to look at the regulatory action policy a little bit later on. The ICO guy, it was Stephen Eckersley, who's the Director of Investigations, who was doing this sort of 1 year in review at the IAPP conference in London. And he said that 2018 should be considered a transition year. And although certainly when GDPR came into force, the Elizabeth Denham, the Commissioner, was very clear that there wasn't going to be a grace period for companies to get up to speed. I think, there was still that element of giving companies a little bit of leeway. And also, the ICO have had to, it's a huge undertaking for the ICO to have to get to grips with. They've hugely expanded their teams. They've had to put lots of new guidance notes in places. They've had lots more, obviously, as we've seen, lots more complaints and breach notifications to deal with. And they are now getting their house in order to effectively regulate going forwards. And the ICO is now embarking on audit work. They do audit businesses in the same way that the taxman will come and audit you. It is entirely possible that you can be audited by the ICO, and this is something that they're now looking at. They have increased their staff by, they are increasing, I don't think that's done yet, but they are increasing their staff by 40% to deal with this additional workload that they have. And of course, they issued the first enforcement notice outside of the UK to a company based in Vancouver in Canada called Aggregate IQ, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later on. So I think the key things to take away from this year is that there has been absolutely an increase, as you would expect, an increase in complaints, an increase in data breach notifications, certainly an increase in fines, and an increase in activity within the data protection authorities and their staffing. And what I'll come on to explain in a bit is why we haven't seen maybe the number and the level of fines that we would have hoped for, is that it just takes a really long time to get from the point of it coming onto the ICA's radar to actually issuing any kind of enforcement. You think back, we've had lots of high profile data breaches where we still know that they're under investigation. The British Airways data breach, the Ticketmaster breach, the Marriott Hotels breach, many, and then the Facebook and Cambridge Analytica scandal is still being investigated. There is a lot going on, and I think we've only seen the very start of the fines. Okay. So I just want to remind you what Elizabeth Denham, the Information Commissioner at the ICO in the UK, said way back last May. And they've always been very clear that it's not a tick box exercise to comply with GDPR that you can put in the drawer after the 25th of May and forget about. She says, unlike planning for the Y2K deadline, GDPR preparation doesn't end on the 25th of May. It requires ongoing effort. It's an evolutionary process for organisations. 25th of May is the date the legislation takes effect, but no business stands still. You will be expected to continue to identify and address emerging privacy and security risks in the weeks, months and years beyond May 2018. So I think for those businesses, and I actually feel that I'm preaching to the converted on this webinar, judging by the results of the poll, the poll that we did earlier on this webinar. But I think that the small businesses that don't have this ongoing compliance model, if they do come up with a problem, if they've got a data breach or a complaint, then they really are going to be in a not a very good place. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. But the ICO have always been very clear, it's an ongoing compliance effort. So the outlook from small businesses. I asked people in my Facebook group, and I've been speaking to other people as well, and the general, I'll just put all these up on this slide, there's more on the next one. But I think, the general sense that I get, the pervasive attitude from small business owners, from those who have complied, is one of indignation that nothing has happened to the ones that have chosen not to comply. And I totally understand that. It's very galling to have taken the time and effort and spent the money that we have to comply when your competitor down the road, either overtly or not, he might have gone to a business network and said, oh, it's all a load of old rubbish, they'll never touch me, I'm not going to do anything. Or they might just have chosen not to comply. It's very galling to see that at the moment, at the current time, nothing has happened to them whatsoever. And as you can see, one of the comments there is millions of businesses have done jack shit. The ICO will never touch them. And the one at the bottom, I think a lot of small business owners think they're too small to need to worry about GDPR and that it probably doesn't apply to them. So there is definitely, I think we fall into two camps as small business owners. They're the ones that know they should be doing something, but really don't think anything bad's going to happen, so they choose not to. And then there are ones like the ones on the left-hand side of that screen where people want to comply, but either through sense of overwhelm, not really knowing what to do, etc., they're not as compliant as they should be. There's those two, and then there's probably the smaller third category where everybody is where they are compliant. I think that third ground is few and far between. But you know, the top left comment there, I feel like I did all I can before the deadline, but there seems less of a panic now. I think people do think that, and unfortunately, you know, if you're running your business on the basis of what the media attention is on, that's not a winning strategy, is it? You know, you need to really analyze the risk, and it might be, you know, that you've done what you need to do, and that you think, you know, a small non-compliance now is not going to cause you any problems. That's fine, as long as you've done that risk analysis and you're happy with that. And you've looked into it properly, because I think a lot of people carry out a risk analysis based on ignorance and not really understanding the true position. But if you've done your risk analysis based on all the facts, you know the true position, and you've decided not to do anything more, brilliant, okay? But at least you've had that strategic decision in your business. The one at the bottom, ashamed to say, it started strong and then went to the bottom of the pile after I put the basics in. Yeah, so again, probably someone who wants to comply, but seemingly more pressing things have come up. And as small business owners, we have a lot to do. You know, well, I run my own small business. I know exactly what it's like. You know, we've got all the digital tax stuff coming in next month, and there's always something new to be taking our time and attention. But I think the point for those people is that ongoing compliance does not need to take much of your time at all. So, so we have this, and there's more here. I feel overwhelmed with the requirements. I tried to care, but I know there'll be stuff I missed. I hate that GDPR killed lead magnets. Well, as an aside, it hasn't killed lead magnets. You just need to know how to do them properly. I have a client who switched off their website rather than deal with an extra aspect of GDPR. I mean, that's just crazy, isn't it? You know, and I know from the conversation in the Facebook group that there was literally one small extra thing that they needed to do to comply, and they switched off a whole profit stream rather than just take that extra step. I personally think that's just a foolish business decision. And the one on the right-hand side, the whole of GDPR is way too complex, and therefore people do not simply care. I think that there is obviously an element of truth in that. GDPR is of itself a complex regulation, especially if you haven't really understood the basics of data protection law that already existed pre-GDPR. But it doesn't need to be complex. You know, I know that I've helped many people through the complexities with my videos and checklists and everything else. And I'm not the only person that does it. You know, there are other, although obviously I'm by far the best. You know, there are, you don't have to sit there and plow through all of the GDPR legislation yourself. You know, the ICO have some excellent guidance notes, and I actually, and I'll come on to my conversation with the ICO in a bit, but I did feed back to them that I think they should, you know, they could deliver their materials in a more user-friendly way, because at the end of the day, all of their guidance notes are still very lengthy. And when people are faced with, you know, 10 pages of lengthy notes, it's very off-putting. So I'm working with the ICO on suggesting how they make more of and they've got excellent information, but I think they could improve the way that it's presented to make it more understandable. And yes, I completely agree, Preben, that the ICO guidance notes are only excellent for people who have English as their main language. Yes, language is, you know, it's a very difficult issue across Europe. But I think to suggest that the ICO would release all of their notes in every different language is obviously not going to be within their resources. But I do sympathise for those of you where you're trying to comply and English isn't your first language, absolutely. Okay, so the ICO point of view, and I'm going to share with you in a moment the conversation that I had with the Deputy Chief Executive of the ICO. just the other day, actually. So they say our work is not just about fines, but we will take our strongest action against those that willfully, negligently, or consistently flout the law. And obviously, the key word there, for me, is negligently, because if you put your head in the sand and you aren't keeping up to date with your ongoing compliance requirements, then that is negligent. And if you're consistently doing that, then you're consistently flouting the law. You might not be doing it willfully, like those examples from the thoughts of small business owners on the previous slide. You might wish that you could be doing more. But if you are not doing it, and you're consistently not doing it, then the ICO will be taking action. Wrong way. The good news is that the ICO do work with the carrot and with not just the stick. They work with both. So, as I've always said, they are not going to come along and fine you immediately for the slightest contravention. They just won't do that. But if they come along, either they're auditing you or there's been a complaint, however you've come to their attention, if they are looking into you and you are taking ongoing steps and showing that you understand that this is something that is an ongoing obligation, then they're going to be much happier and either not fine you or give you a much lower fine than if you said, oh, well, yes, I did do a bit of work back in May, but then other things took over and, well, it's just a bit too complicated. That's going to get short shrift. Okay. But if you can keep taking, I'm going to show you at the end of the webinar how simple ongoing compliance is. So if you can show them that, and even if you're not perfect, that's fine. But if you can show them that you understand that this is an ongoing obligation and that is important in your business, it really is. Gone are the days when data protection was something that the office manager did. This is a C-suite level business matter for every business. And the other point to note out is that fines are proportionate. Okay, so again, no scaremongering here. If you have sent someone an email when they've opted out, are you going to get fined? If it's a real mistake and you've responded quickly and sorted it out, then probably not. Although I do seem to remember, actually, there was a fine under PECR where a business did that to one man, and the business was fined £1,000. So I'm going to dig that out, actually, and post that in my Facebook group, because I was very surprised about that. And I think that's because it is no, I'm not going to say that because that's going to open a can of worms. I will post that in the Facebook group. So, but generally the point is fines are proportionate. So I don't want to use this webinar to reopen any sense of panic that small businesses have, or, I mean, goodness me, we had people say, I'm going to close down my business because I can't afford to comply and I can't afford to get fined. Really, it's not to engender a sense of panic. It's to say that ongoing compliance is important, and that there actually, in reality, is not that much that you need to do to comply on an ongoing basis. Okay. Right, let me have a little pause and look at the chat box, see what's been going on in here. Yeah, Polish one we're going to talk about. The ICO does a good job. The Polish Data Protection Authority did nothing for 2 years. Okay, well, it's just shown its weight by fining the 220,000 euros. So that's a pretty good start. I think that's one of the biggest fines, actually, apart from the Google fine. So Poland certainly has put itself on the map in the last week or so. Do I know what percentage of auditing is being done against small businesses? Nope. Don't think the ICO will release that information. Barbara says, I'm certainly getting just as much unsolicited emails. Yes, that's, GDPR will not make all of our nuisance calls go away and mean that we won't get any spam anymore. But I think that, you know, we know that certainly, Barbara, you can report that to the relevant authority. We're not going to close down all the malicious spammers, etc. But I think, you know, certainly I have seen that businesses that I interact with as their customer are being more respectful to my data. Most of my clients think that GDPR only applies to websites. Oh dear, tell them to come in my group meal and get my pack and we'll educate them. A doctor's dealing in personal injury said they are dealing with 150 solicitors and the solicitors were not encrypting emails and just password protecting injury reports. The doctors felt the panic had passed or calmed down. Yes, I think that is the sense, but with the potential, with not having the proper security in place and the potential for data breaches, they're taking a risk because the public now are much more savvy about it. There's going to be much more complaints to the ICO, and the fines, are in there. The fines are in the pipeline. We just haven't heard about them yet because it takes so long to investigate, and they've got limited resources. But I don't know about you, but I wouldn't like to have suffered a data breach and then be waiting for 6 months or 12 months or however long to find out what the outcome of that is. I don't think that would be very good for my business. Okay, thank you for your thoughts there. Right, on with the webinar. Okay, so this chap, a terrible photo. I scoured the internet trying to find a decent photo of Paul Arnold and couldn't. So sorry about the quality of this photo. But I had a really good chat with Paul actually, and he was, because I met a couple of the ICO guys at this IAPP conference. Paul wasn't there, but his colleagues were, and I had a chat with them and I asked them what they were doing about small, sort of compliance for small businesses, particularly because, a lot of the press is focused on the Google fine, the Facebook investigation, etc. And we had a really good chat. And what he said surprised me actually, because I started off the conversation by, after I'd explained, how I was helping small businesses, etc. I said, I understand that you'll be reluctant to fine small businesses for non-compliance because of the obvious reasons of, in fact, I didn't actually say what the obvious reasons were to him, but in my mind, that was that, they wouldn't want to look too heavy-handed with small businesses. And what he said surprised me, because he said that we are not reluctant to serve fines on small businesses. It just takes time to go through the process. So that did actually surprise me. And I asked him to send me through a quote for this webinar. And this is it on this slide and the next one. And he said, for those who thought GDPR was the next Y2K and hid behind the sofa until it passed by, the ICO is committed to taking action to address non or poor compliance. We recognise and appreciate the effort and commitment of those small organisations continuing to invest in systems and practices which respect people's privacy. We know that taking action against those who fail to comply with the law is an important way of us doing that. So from that, I really got the sense that he shared the frustration, or certainly understood the frustration of small businesses who have gone to the time and effort of complying. When you see your competitors having done nothing, carrying on merrily the same way that they had done, in some cases perceiving that they've got an advantage because they haven't had to cut their email list in half or more, and they haven't had to put or haven't chosen to put extra tick boxes on their opt-in forms. So he really appreciated that, and interestingly said that we know that taking action against those who fail to comply is an important way of the ICO recognizing and appreciating the effort of the businesses that have complied. Okay, so I think that's a really important point to note about the ICO, because, quite frankly, what is the incentive to comply if they're not going to take any action? Now, I can talk till I'm blue in the teeth about the competitive advantage that it gives us in terms of greater trust with our audience in terms of, okay, you might lose part of your email list, but the ones who are left will be the ones who actually want to hear from you. So you'll have a much more engaged audience, etc. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, really businesses are motivated by the threat of some kind of action being taken against them. So I was really interested to hear that from Paul. Okay, let's look a bit closer at the regulatory action policy. And if you just Google ICO regulatory action policy, then you'll find it there in black and white. But it's all about, so it basically sets out all of the action that they are able to take. Penalty notice is just one of those actions that they're able to take, but I'm focusing in on this so that you know when there's a chance that you would get fined. There's a number of points that they'll take, they will take into account, and this spreads onto the next page as well. And it's not to say that you'd get a fine if just one of these applied, or if all of these are, or you wouldn't get fined unless all of them applied, but these are the things that they will look at in assessing whether a penalty notice is appropriate. So obviously the more individuals that are affected, the more the chance of being fined. They'll look at the degree of damage or harm to the individual. They'll look at whether sensitive personal data has been involved, and they'll also look at whether they've sent you an information notice, an assessment notice, or an enforcement notice, which are the other notices that they can serve. And to be fair, which they typically do before serving a penalty notice. They'll look at whether you are working with them or not. I mean, I read some of their case reports, and some businesses just don't reply to them. And you think, what are you thinking? You know, surely the best way to reduce any kind of fine is to cooperate with the authority, but some will literally just ignore them, which I think is crazy. They'll look at whether there's been a repeated breach of obligations or a failure to rectify a previously identified problem. They'll look at whether willful action, including inaction, is a feature of the case. And this is what I was saying earlier about, you know, those businesses that we all know, where they say, well, the ICO can't touch me, I'm doing nothing. That will absolutely be taken into account. So if those companies were to suffer a data breach, which, as we all know, data breaches are increasing on a daily and weekly basis. You know, the hackers are winning the game. And of course, it's not just the hackers. It's if a member of staff leaves some sensitive data or even non-sensitive data in the toilet, or leaves a briefcase on a train, or whatever it is. If there's a data breach and you're investigated, that willful action or inaction will absolutely be taken into account in discussing the level of the fine. And I'll talk later about a fine from on a German company, and that was absolutely taken into account. Whether they'll look at whether there's been a failure to apply reasonable measures to mitigate any breach, and they'll look at whether there's been a failure to implement the accountability provisions of the GDPR. And what I hope you know what accountability means, because that is one of the overriding principles of the GDPR. But really what that means is keeping internal records of processing, which we're obliged to do, carrying out data protection impact assessments when we need to, having procedures in place for the exercise of data subject rights, appointing a data protection officer and a representative where necessary, etc. Okay, so they'll very much be looking at that side of things. Okay, let me just see, there's been a flurry of comments. Let me just have a look at these. Okay, Preben, I hope I'm saying your name right, says, I really don't understand on what basis the EU can fine small companies in the USA. I will come on to that in a bit. Corey D says, I know companies who've had data breaches but haven't told the ICO. Their customers have flagged it to the business owners. Okay, well, I mean, they're taking a risk, aren't they, Corey D? Because if they've had data breaches, and remember, not all data breaches are reportable to the ICO. So it might be the case that they weren't actually reportable. But you know, they're playing a dangerous game, aren't they? Because all it takes is one customer or more to report them to the ICO, and then they'll be in trouble. Richard says, I've not seen fake emails purporting to come from the ICO, but seeing loads from fake emails from HMRC. I wonder what steps the ICO are taking to validate their correspondence. Yeah, good point. Good point. Good point, Richard. Okay, so ICO action in the last 12 months. Now, Now this is all publicly available. If you have the time and inclination to do so, you can go on their website and see what action they've taken and read the case reports about what was the infringement and the considerations that the ICO took in deciding what sanction to levy. But I thought this was interesting to see. So in the last 12 months, this is the action that the ICO have taken. You can see that the vast majority of action is in relation to marketing activities, and that the vast majority of enforcements were monetary penalties. And interestingly, actually, the vast majority of particularly the marketing cases were under PECR, PECA, and not the GDPR. But interesting to see, the vast majority marketing and the vast majority involved monetary penalties. The majority actually were in relation to nuisance calls, followed closely by bombarding people with texts. And there were a number of fines for sending emails to people who had opted out. So I'm sure that everybody on this call is not the type of business that does nuisance calls or spams people with loads of texts, but do be careful about sending emails to people who had opted out, because we have seen a number of fines in that regard. And now this is one thing that I want to alert you to. If you haven't yet paid the controller charge, I would do that sooner rather than later if you need to, because the ICO, that is their current enforcement action, I suppose, is against people who haven't paid the new fee. So they sent out 900 letters to say, you know, and again, I don't understand why people don't respond. If you get a letter from the ICO saying you haven't paid your fee, you've got 2 weeks to pay it or we'll fine you, obviously you pay it, don't you? But anyway, it seems that over 100 organisations didn't pay the fee. They've now been fined. And I'll come on in a minute to remind you about what that fee is all about and what the fine is. And they also, as I mentioned earlier, issued an enforcement notice under GDPR against Aggregate IQ, which again, I'll come into in more detail. But the point I want to get across is that a large number of cases are still being investigated. Paul couldn't tell me the exact number on their books, but it's large. So I think the fact that we haven't seen as many cases being brought under GDPR as we'd have thought doesn't mean that there aren't any. It means that it takes time to progress through the ICO system and for it actually to be levied. So I think we can certainly expect to see a high number of enforcement actions in 2019. Okay, so another little poll for you to wake you up if you're getting a bit snoozy at this point of the webinar, and I'm afraid that we are going to go on a little bit longer than an hour. I just can't help it. I just get too excited. I'm so sorry. I must have done about 300 or 400 webinars in my career, and I'd say probably about 2 of them have been to time. Paul, do you think that the ICO should levy fines against businesses that aren't compliant with GDPR? And I mean the ones that say, you know, like the comment that we saw earlier, you know, the ICO can't touch me. You know, I'm not going to take the time and effort to comply. The ICO aren't going to do anything. What do you think? Do you think that the ICO should levy fines against businesses that aren't compliant with GDPR? Let me run this one. Oh, right. How do I get to the next poll? Right, here we are. 2. Right, sorry, but that was that 2 surprised me. It was because it says it here. Poll 2, do you think that the ICO should levy fines? Right, it's a yes or no. I'm going to launch that poll. Vote now, please. Okay, interesting comment in the box. Yes to large ones, no for micro businesses. Yeah, the problem you get there though is where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line? I mean, that was really in the discussions of GDPR, they wanted to include a small business exemption, but where do you draw the line? And who's to say that a small business owner isn't doing something that is as imposing to privacy as a larger organisation? Very hard to do that. Okay, so the result of that poll, I'm going to end that now and share the results. So we have 87% think that the ICO should levy fines. Levy fines just means impose fines, different word for impose fines, and 13% think no. Okay, so for the ones who think no, I'd be really interested to know why you think no. But thank you for participating in that poll. Okay, let me get rid of that. Right, so onwards. So fines for not paying the controller charge. Hopefully you know about this, but if you don't, then I just pay your fee of 40 quid, because most people on this call are going to be in that category, I would suspect. So if your maximum turnover so if you've got a turnover of less than 632,000, or actually up to 630,000, less than, no more, got to get the terminology right, no more than 10 members of staff, then your fee is £40 every 12 months. For the middle tier there, it's £60, and large organisations, 2,900. This replaces the old data protection fee where we had to go and register and tell people what we were doing with our processing of personal data. This is just a different way for the ICO to get their money in. And there are some exemptions in the same way that there used to be for the old data protection fee, so do check if you are exempt. But the fines are, they didn't actually break down the fines in terms of the 100 or so that were fined, but the maximum fine is £4,350. So if you've got a choice between paying your fee of £40 or £60, or even 2,900, then that's better than getting the fine. So if you haven't done that yet, no, that is for 12 months, Tina, not a month. No, that is for 12 months. And if you've already paid the old data protection fee before GDPR came into force, then on expiry of that, then you have to pay this new fee. Okay, so don't worry if you haven't paid this, but you had the old data protection fee still going on, because that was a 12-month fee, then don't worry, you won't get fined if you've still got that time left on that other fee. When that other fee expires after 12 months from when you paid that, then you need to pay this controller charge. Yes, you can put direct debits in place, and actually there's a £5 reduction for paying by direct debit, because then you can just set it, forget about it, and every 12 months they will direct debit the fee. So I think that's a very sensible idea to do that. And okay, so Nigel, I think this is in response to you voting no, that the ICO shouldn't fine businesses for not complying. He says, fines is the default of governments for trying to change behaviour. Education and monitoring with the threat of naming, sharing and closing down for non-cooperation would be better. Yes, I think that certainly the viewpoint of the ICO is when they say they work with the carrot and the stick. I think certainly education is a big piece of that. Naming and shaming, when certainly again before they will issue a penalty notice, typically they will issue an enforcement notice, and those enforcement notices are public and often get picked up in the press. So certainly there is adverse publicity from that. And closing down, yes, certainly as part of an enforcement notice, they can say you're not allowed to process this data. If they need to do that for their business, then that is in effect closing them down. Okay, great. So Aggregate IQ quickly, for those of you who are interested in how anywhere in Europe is going to enforce against restrictions outside of Europe. Aggregate IQ is a data analytics company based in Canada, and it helps political groups improve campaigning during the Brexit referendum through use of names and email addresses of individuals residing in the UK. The ICO had two issues with it. It failed to notify people about the use of their information as required under Article 14, so i.e. didn't have appropriate privacy notices in place, and didn't communicate that to the individuals whose data they were using. And they actually lacked a lawful basis for processing personal data under Article 6. So the ICO served an enforcement notice on Aggregate IQ, which required them to cease processing personal data of UK or EU citizens obtained from UK political organisations or otherwise for the purposes of data analytics, political campaigning, or any other advertising purposes. So, so there was questions as to whether Aggregate IQ would comply, and they certainly appealed in the first instance. But then what happened, and this isn't that widely reported, but what happened was that so Aggregate IQ did appeal to the first tier tribunal, but then discontinued that appeal when the ICO narrowed the terms of the notice that they had to comply with. And interestingly, a fine was not levied on Aggregate IQ. So I think this is an interesting case in that it shows that certainly the ICO feel that they have jurisdiction over companies that are outside of the EU. It's interesting in that Aggregate IQ have presumably complied with the enforcement notice, because we haven't heard about I haven't heard anything more about it, and the time for complying has expired. So presumably they have complied because a fine hasn't been levied, and in the enforcement notice it did say if they didn't comply, then I can't remember if they said, if they actually I think they would have specified the fine, because I would have remembered that. But anyway, it seems that Aggregate IQ ultimately accepted that the ICO had jurisdiction over them. So, so an interesting first case about companies outside of the EU abusing the data of people within the EU. And obviously, I'm sure there will be more, many more cases like this that arise. Brexit. If you've missed I've just seen a question in the chat box about Brexit. If you missed my webinar on Brexit, go and have a look at it. I did post that a link to the replay in the Facebook group, so go and have a watch of that if you haven't seen that. There will be a big impact by Brexit. Make sure you're up to speed with that. I mean, that is, you know, another example of one of the ongoing compliance issues. Things like Brexit, there's stuff you've got to do, or your documents won't be compliant. It's that simple. And if there is a data breach or you get investigated for any reason, you can't say, oh yes, but all my documents were okay before Brexit. It's just not going to wash with the regulators. You know, you're a responsible business owner. You've got to keep up to speed with these things, even though at times it is, you know, it's not something we love doing. It's sometimes hard to do. You've still got to do it. Okay. Let's look quickly at some European fines, because I'm conscious of time. We've already mentioned the Polish fine. That was, again, a failure to provide privacy notice under Article 14. It did involve a very large number of people. I think it was about 6 million. So that's reflected in the level of the fine. So don't worry, if don't start panicking if you haven't provided your privacy notice to a few of your list. You're not going to get fined 220,000, but it does demonstrate the importance of informing people about what you're doing with their data. The Portuguese DPA, big fine there on staff members illicitly accessing sensitive data. And we know from the Morrison's case that you can be vicariously liable for your staff's actions. And this is why ongoing compliance in relation to staff is so important. If you've got new staff in, you need to train them. You need to be giving existing staff reminders as to their responsibilities. Now, that arguably that won't stop a vindictive, vexatious man like Mr. Skelton in the Morrison's case. He had a grudge to bear against Morrison's and wanted to harm them. But you know, if other staff had been trained into what to look for, if the systems had been put in place that would alert other staff to what he'd been doing, then they wouldn't be in the place that they were. Now this is the German case that I wanted to talk about. So the German DPA, it was the State Commissioner for Data Protection and Freedom of Information in Baden-Württemberg. There's about 20 million different data protection authorities in Germany, so it gets confusing. And here a social media company had the users of its chat platform compromised and made publicly available by hackers. So it was a hack, but when they were looking into it, the authority discovered that the passwords were stored in an unencrypted form. Now, the fine was significantly lower than it would have been because of the fact that the company cooperated with the Data Protection Authority. They reported the hack, they informed users immediately and comprehensively, and when the Data Protection Authority was explaining why it had decided on the level of the fine, it highlighted the company's exemplary cooperation and the significant improvement of its level of IT security in the aftermath of the hack and the investigation. And I think it was they put a sort of €6-figure investment into IT security. And that was obviously after the breach, but beforehand, they had been wanting to comply. Okay, granted, having passwords stored unencrypted was brilliant, but the fact that they cooperated, the fact that they had been trying to be compliant, had a great impact on the decision to fine them just 20,000. Now, I don't know about you, I wouldn't like to be found 20,000 in any event, but it could have been much higher. So Austrian DPA imposed a fine for illegal video surveillance activities. I'm sure no one on this call is doing that. But then the last one, interestingly, the German DPA imposed a €5,000 fine on a small business, and it was small. I've not got any details about how small, but it's called a small business, for lack of a processing contract. Okay, so something that many people, certainly small businesses, probably many of us on this call, don't have processor agreements in place for every single processor that we have. And I think that's a reminder that authorities will see that as a serious breach and will fine. And I certainly don't want to lose £5,000 out of my business for not taking 10 minutes to put a processor contract into 10 minutes if the processor is nice and signs it immediately, slightly longer if they want to negotiate it. But that's, I think, a good reminder to us that we can't forget about our processes and making sure that we do thorough due diligence on the processes and putting the right contracts into place. So the risks of non-compliance. Oh no, one more. No, actually, I'm going to come on to it on this slide because it was an interesting recent case that I want to mention, but I'll deal with it on this slide. So audits, we've already talked about. You could just be unlucky. And again, I'm not suggesting that every single person on this webinar is going to be audited by the ICO in the next 12 months or even ever. But, it depends whether you like playing the odds or not. Personally, I don't. I want to have all of my matters in order so that if there is a chance that I'm audited, I can show that I am making every effort towards compliance. Complaints, as we saw, the number of complaints is rising hugely. Individuals are much more educated about their data protection rights, and frankly, if you don't comply, there's a very good risk that somebody is going to report you. Not just that, competitors are getting more savvy. They are looking for opportunities to trip you up, and it's just the stakes are higher. Let's put it that way. Since GDPR came into force. You've got a risk of an enforcement notice and adverse publicity. Like I was saying earlier, you might not get fined, but even an enforcement notice, obviously you've had the ICO crawling all over your books and the time and effort that's taken to do that. You've had the stress of waiting to see whether, what's going to be the outcome. Are you going to get a penalty notice or not? And then even if you do only get an enforcement notice, which is basically saying, if you don't do this by this time, we will fine you. It still will include adverse publicity. It's all public on the ICO site, and you know, there is still a lot of media interest in fines and enforcements coming out of the GDPR, and you could find yourself, you know, certainly within your sector or even wider, that people are talking about this, and it is really the kind of publicity that we just don't want. There's the obvious risk of fines of whatever level. You know, a fine at whatever level is not good news for a business. Again, it's not just finding the money; it's the adverse publicity of that as well. You know, it's just, yeah. I'm shaking my head in despair at the people that would risk non-compliance. You're just doing certain small things to risk all of this hanging over them. Group actions, we're seeing, you know, there's. I'm afraid to say that the ambulance chasers of the legal world they're hot on this. You know, in the aftermath of the British Airways data breach, I was getting regular Facebook sponsored ads, sponsored messages in my news feed. Have you been involved in or were you subject to the British Airways data breach? If so, get in touch. No win, no fee, etc. And unfortunately, we're going to see more of this. So you might not be British Airways, but there is still that potential, because what is new under the GDPR is that civil claims can be made against you by disgruntled data subjects, and that is new. And what actually is, and what I wanted to talk about this recent case was that typically if you were to bring an action and be unsuccessful, then excuse me, then and particularly in the small claims court, there wouldn't be a cost order against you necessarily. Okay, but in this recent case, I'll post it in the Facebook group. Actually, there was an issue in the Bradford County Court, which was in relation to GDPR compliance and the question of what constitutes an excessive or unfounded request under Article 12.5 of the GDPR. And so what had happened was that an individual requested access to his medical records in relation to a complex legal matter about his employment. He asked his doctors for them, and they said the request was excessive due to the nature of the matter, and requested that a £20 fee was payable. So I quite like this actually. Rather than just pay the £20 fee, he took them to court and won. But the interesting thing was that on costs, GDPR says that applicants are entitled to costs. There's a disparity between the general rule under CPR 31.17, which I won't go into, but it's one of the court procedure rules. And so the doctor's surgery had to pay the applicant's costs of £1,500. So by just not responding properly to a subject access request, you could find yourself paying costs of £1,500 and upwards, depending on how the case has progressed and the level of fees, legal fees, and etc. that the other parties incurred. So this is what I say about, you know, you might have weighed up all the risks and decided that ongoing compliance isn't for you. But the problem is that most people don't know about things like this that can come along and trip you up. So other risks, loss of customers for processes that aren't compliant. We saw that a lot in my Facebook group, and certainly people I've been talking to recently have said that is a real issue. If you are a supplier and you're processing your customers' data and you're not compliant, customers are going elsewhere. Similarly, if you are a controller and you're not compliant, I know lots of processors who are reluctant to continue to work for you because you've said, no, I'm not interested in GDPR compliance. Obviously, if you've not got proper security in place, then you've got a greater chance of data breaches and all of the consequential fines, stress, wasted time, etc. dealing with that. You've got a lack of trust from your customers. You've got a loss of customers because they don't trust you anymore, and hence, a loss of revenue. That should be loss of revenue. So So as I say, I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted for those of you on this webinar, but those are the risks. And we kind of forget about that, don't we? You know, on our day-to-day, we think, it's not actually that important. Not heard any headline fines about this. Be all right. But actually, in reality, it's not all right. So data breaches, we know that they are increasing. We saw the stats at the start of the webinar. Data breaches are becoming more common. In fact, there were 59,430 disclosed data breaches across Europe from the date that GDPR came into force until the end of January this year. Only 91 fines during that period, and I'll say a bit more about that in a bit, but together, interestingly, the Netherlands, Germany, and the United Kingdom were responsible for nearly 2/3 of all of those data breach notifications. Out of those 59, nearly 60,000 data breaches, those three countries were responsible for nearly 2/3. And the UK is you know, it's one of the main countries where businesses are targeted, certainly in terms of the hackers. And I don't know, maybe otherwise we're just not as hot on our employee training, and there's data breaches occurring that way. But this is a bit of research from my old firm, DLA Piper. Regulators are stretched and have a large backlog of notified breaches in their inboxes. Inevitably, the larger headline-grabbing breaches, like the British Airways and Marriott, etc., have taken priority when allocating resources. So many organisations are still waiting to hear from regulators whether any action will be taken against them in relation to the breaches that they have notified. So as I say, the fact that we haven't seen more fines doesn't mean there aren't going to be any. And I don't know about you, but you know, I wouldn't want that hanging over me. Running a business, you don't want that investigation and potential fine hanging over you. Best thing, be compliant, get robust security in place, and minimise your chances of this happening. And don't forget the employee training as well. That's key. In fact, most breaches do occur through just employees being careless. Okay, so benefits of the compliance, it's the flip side of what I've just talked about. I'm going to quickly run through this. One I want to pick up on, though, is that it does, this is a global shift in regulation. As we see the big data, the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, trust and privacy are absolutely key. And this is a global trend. Okay, it's not just GDPR and that's it. There are going to be laws coming out all over the world that are very similar to the GDPR. We've got revisions to PECR coming up in the next 12 months to 2 years, and you're much better placed to comply with future laws if you are on top of your compliance with the GDPR. And also, I spoke to the ICO about certifications because that was certainly anticipated in the text of the GDPR. Now, we don't have certifications at the moment, and that is really purely through the fact that the ICO don't have the internal resources to roll that out at the moment, but it's absolutely something that they are looking at. And I can quite foresee a time when customers and suppliers will be chosen on the basis of certifications or not. So I think that what we can be doing now simply in order to ensure ongoing compliance will absolutely help in getting that certification and having that competitive advantage that brings. Yes, Richard mentions the keynote from Apple. Great talk. If you Google it, you can read the full text of it. Their CEO really painted a very stark picture of the future if we didn't have the right privacy controls in place. I think we're at a real tipping point where we could go either way, and certainly Apple are pushing the US to put in place a federal privacy law across all states, it's absolutely an increasing global trend. We're going to see more privacy regulation, not less. More examples being made, not less, more fines, not less. And the sooner that we can get on board with that and really put GDPR and data protection at the heart of our organisations, the better it will be, not just for us, but for everybody. So obvious, this is all obvious stuff. The last one there, you can sleep at night. You know, I don't know about you, but if I've got a chance of being audited by the ICO and there's things I can do that will take me, I don't know, maybe half an hour every month, I think I'm going to choose to do something half an hour every month so that I know that if I am audited or if there is a complaint or if there is a data breach or etc., then I know I'm okay. You know, I don't like taking unnecessary risk. Maybe that's just the lawyer in me, but you know, I think I'd rather sleep soundly at night knowing that I've got all my ducks in a row than take the risk. And very quickly, I'm very conscious of time. Thank you for sticking with me. I'm not going to talk about Thomas. We've got no time. I spoke about Thomas when I was doing my talk in San Diego at the Digital Marketer Conference, but I'll talk about him another time. So ongoing compliance, it's much easier than you think, seriously, okay? Especially with me by your side. I've chosen this image because that was after I just got back from the hairdressers. Most of my little videos, my hair is looking like I've been dragged through a hedge backwards, but this one actually, I look half decent. But, you know, I'm here to make it easy for you. And you know, obviously the Facebook group is my main communication platform. I know a lot of my emails just don't get through, which is highly frustrating when you spend ages doing them. And it's easier for me. I prefer the sense of community. I like people being able to interact with my updates, and I've been doing that through the Facebook group. Obviously, the pack will be updated as we make changes, and I'll show you how that pack is going to be updated in a minute. But you don't need to do this yourself. You know, I love, rightly or wrongly, I love this stuff, and I spend all my time doing it. So you don't need to try and work out what to do by yourself. So here's, and I'm actually going to put in and I saw it in the comments earlier, and I've been meaning to do this. It's on the list of things to do, but this absolutely given me the kick up the bum to do this. Put a checklist of ongoing compliance in there for you. But it's simple, okay? You need to keep your policies and your notices up to date. What's the simplest way of doing that? Buy my pack if you haven't already, and you know, make sure that, so for example, we've got Brexit coming up. You will need to make changes to your, or have we? I mean, I won't even go into the farce that has been in our parliament for the past few weeks, but at some point we might Brexit. So, but that's just one example of potential change. Do you have to work out by yourself what Brexit involves for data protection laws and do it all yourself? No, you just subscribe to my pack on an ongoing basis for less than £7 a month, and it's there for you. You need to keep records of your processing up to date. That's already in the pack. You've got, if you remember, you did your data inventory. So every month, or yeah, probably every month is fine. Glance at that, think, am I doing any new processing? No, okay, fine, put it back in the drawer. Or next month, yes, actually I am doing some new processing. I'm going to add that onto my data inventory, and I'm going to work out the lawful ground of processing and blah, 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 okay? So the record of processing is in the GDPR pack. Do it once a month. That's great. It'll take you half an hour. You've obviously got to pay the controller charge every 12 months. If you set up a direct debit, you don't even need to think about it. You need to respond promptly to data subject rights. Now that involves keeping your staff training up to date and ensuring that new staff get trained. If you haven't got any staff, that's great, it's just you. Make sure you recognise and respond promptly to data subject rights, and make sure that you are dealing with them the right way. If you are concerned that they are excessive, or you know you don't want to reply to them, then speak to a consultant, speak to a lawyer and find out. You know, don't risk the £1,500 court case like the GP surgery did. You need to carry out DPIAs when necessary. There's videos on DPIAs. There's a DPIA checklist in the pack, but really you only need to consider DPIAs if you are putting in place a new product, a new service, a new system, a new way of doing things. Then let that flag in your mind, oh, hang on a minute, I've got to put privacy at the heart of this. Let's go and dig out the DPIA and the DPI checklist. In short, actually, do you want to just take a photo of that slide? I'll just leave it on that for a bit longer, so you can take a photo of that and the next slide. This recording will be going in the membership site. So if you're a member of my Legal Academy, or you are subscribed to the GDPR module on an ongoing basis, then you'll get access to this recording on an ongoing basis. And also, I'm doing webinars every month, so you'll get recordings to those going forwards. Do companies outside of the UK need to pay the controller charge? No, I think that is just for UK companies. I think I've never been asked that question. Pretty sure it's just for UK companies. I'll drop a note on that in the group. Let me just check. Write that down so I remember. UK companies only pay. I'm 95% sure it's just for UK companies. But I'll put a note if it's other than that. Okay. Right, next one. So ensure your data security is robust. This is a really big one, actually, and one where I think a lot of us small businesses fall down. You know, chances are the way that you're going to come to the attention of the authorities is if you've got a data breach, or if somebody complains about you. So make sure that your data security is robust. I think I was quoted like 500 quid for an IT specialist to come in and review it all and do some things, and that's fine, isn't it, in the scale of things. Remind data subjects of their right to opt out periodically. I'd suggest every 6 months. That is fine. Don't forget to carry out due diligence on new processes. So if somebody is processing personal data on your behalf, it might be that you've instructed somebody to carry out to do your Facebook ads. So you're uploading a list of your CRM and sending that to them so that they can do some retargeting or whatever they're doing. Then make sure that you are carrying out due diligence on them and making sure that they are GDPR compliant, and obviously put processor agreements into place with the new processors. Remember that €5,000 fine that I was talking about before. Make sure that with every new processor you are making sure that they're up to scratch and putting the contractual documentation in place. Put a representative in place if you need one post-Brexit. So if you're outside of the EU, then you'll need, if you are operating within the EU, so if you're targeting people in the EU or you've got customers or prospects in the EU, then you'll need a representative anyway. And for those of you who haven't watched my Brexit webinar, obviously after Brexit, the UK will become a third country, and we will need representatives within Europe if we are targeting people in Europe or we have customers or prospects in Europe. Okay, watch the Brexit webinar. There's much more detail on that if you missed that. Okay, and if you're outside of the EU and new to the concept of representatives, if you search in my Facebook group, there is a video that I did on representatives for you. Okay. Remember that data protection by design and by default is the new standard, and that needs to be considered when you're putting in place new processes and systems. And you need to keep your international transfers under review. I'm sure most people on this call know that if you are transferring data internationally, by that I mean outside of the EU, then you need to put certain safeguards into place, whether that be model clauses or rely on one of the derogations. It's a complex topic. If you're not familiar with all of that, then there is a video on it in my pack, and I think there's a free video in the Facebook group. So do make sure that as we Brexit, you keep that under review, because the position of the UK will change. And again, if you haven't seen the Brexit webinar on data transfers and what needs to be done, go and watch that. And finally, keep abreast of new laws, changes to law and case law. Now that's, you don't have to do that, because I'm going to do that for you, okay? But it's important to do this. As I say, if there is an investigation due to a complaint, an audit, a data breach, whatever it might be, you can't just say, oh, I bought Suzanne's pack, or didn't, as the case may be, and thought that would do forevermore. No, you have to know what's going on with new laws, changes to law and case law. Now, you can work all that out yourself, of course, but I wouldn't recommend it because it's going to take you ages and you probably won't enjoy doing it. I'll do it for you. I'll make sure that I'm doing these regular webinars, keeping you up to date. I'll make sure that all of the documents in the pack are updated, etc. So it's easy. So please do take a photo of that slide as well. But really, in reality, there isn't much there, is there? If we look at these two slides, just go back to this one. So the first one there, the policies and notices, I'm going to do that for you. You remember to actually, make the changes. Keep your records of processing up to date. That's half an hour every month. Pay your controller charge. You can automate that on direct debit. Respond promptly to data subject rights. Well, you've got all the documentation that you need in my GDPR pack to help you with that. And then if you've got a problem with it, reach out, or it's a more intricate case, reach out to a consultant at the time. Keep your staff trained. DPIA is only as and when that might come up. Data security, if you've not sorted that out, then there's I know a number of good security consultants are in my GDPR group, so post a message there and see who can help you. Put a note in your diary to remind data subjects they can opt out every 6 months. Have a flag in your head that every new processor, you need to do due diligence, a new processor agreement in place, and the rest of it I'll help you with. So easy peasy weasy. So finally, the overview, well, in summary, that should be not the overview, in summary, from Elizabeth Denham, the Information Commissioner, small businesses should not panic. If we had a complaint, if we had a data breach and a company came to us, we would first look at whether they were on their compliance journey, if they were aware of what they needed to do, and actually it went on to say, and if they were actually doing that. So I think the message still is do not panic. No need to panic, but don't think that now that the 25th of May has been and gone, you don't need to do anything, because that will, it won't be taken into account by the ICO. They will be looking at your ongoing compliance. And as we've just seen, it is relatively easy and painless to do if you know how. So I will put a little checklist together for you, but it's essentially going to be these points. And as I think the easiest thing that you can do, if you haven't already, get my GDPR pack. It covers pretty much everything that you need to be compliant. It's £197 still, which is tremendous value for everything that you get. There's the link there that you can go to. But also for those of you who are coming up to renewal, for just £6.42 a month, I'm going to do all the heavy lifting for you. I'm going to be making sure that all of your documents are kept up to date. I'm going to be doing this series of webinars that are going to be alerting you to changes that are coming up. So for example, we've got one on the changes to PECR that are coming up. I'm going to change all of the documents for PECR. So really it's a very small price to pay for being able to say to the regulator that yes, you are continuing with your compliance obligations. And certainly a much easier way for you to do that than trying to work it all out yourself. So that's the easiest way as far as I'm concerned. I'm sure there are other lawyers and consultants that offer something similar. I think mine's pretty good. It's up to you where you want to go, but certainly do something that makes it easy for you. You can either sit there and do nothing and risk all of the not great consequences that we've just talked about, or you can pay £6.42 a month and have someone else do all the heavy lifting. I know what I'd prefer. Thank you, Paul, for saying that. Paul says, I've renewed already, continues to be worth its weight in gold. Thanks, Suzanne. Thank you, Paul. Yes, Kirsty, you will be told when it's time to renew. Yes, Tina, I'll send out renewal notice. And I must apologise, actually, because we've had a bit of a cock-up at internal systems and staff at this end. The people who bought the pack early on, they were receiving messages saying, the first message they received said, you've got 1 day to renew, or it expires today or whatever. So apologies for that. We normally send the reminders out at least a week before so that you have time to to renew if you want to do so. We've not been great this week at it. Apologies if that has affected you. For other people, then we've got better systems in place now that hopefully will work. So if you, it's basically 12 months membership to the membership site. You can absolutely take the documents that you've got already and continue to use them. You can continue to use them for as long as you like, but obviously they're not going to be compliant going forwards because they've been updated for all the necessary changes. And it's 12 months from the date that you bought the pack. Yeah, so you can either check the date you bought it if you think that you've missed a reminder, or just try and get access to the site because the software automatically locks you out after it's expired. If you're locked out and you've not had any reminders, just email us at support@suzannedibble.com and we'll sort that out for you. Okay. There's a question about it being usable in the US. The US cost is just whatever the equivalent is of £197 in dollars, and yes, you can absolutely use it to be GDPR compliant within the US. So yeah, we have a number of a very large number actually of people from the US and other jurisdictions that have bought PAC and used it. So yes, absolutely. Does the PAC include PCR as well as GDPR? Yes, it does, absolutely. There are those regulations very much work hand in hand. So yes, PCR is a key element of it. Chris says, when will my book be published? We don't know for sure, probably December. So when I say later this year, it will be very much later this year. Amazing, actually. I've got to have all the text in by the end of June, and then it takes them 6 months with all the editing and, you know, getting all the typecast or whatever I don't know technical terms, but, you know, it takes them a long time to sort it out before it's actually published. Yes, Eric, no VAT for the US, so $251 with no VAT, that's right. Amazon says the 20th of December. Does it really? Gosh, I didn't even know it was on Amazon. That's interesting. Thank you, Emma. I'll look that up. Okay, let me just check these are the questions. I've just seen one about, oh yes, actually. So actually I've not finished my slides. This is what is going to be added to the GDPR pack in the foreseeable future. And yes, absolutely. Certainly when I made changes initially within the sort of, you know, first month of producing the pack, we did make changes and we weren't brilliant about communicating those changes. So it will be much clearer this time. So yes, thank you for raising that, but we will absolutely point out the changes that you need to make to things like privacy notice, etc. But these are the new documents that are going to be added. We're going to have the revised privacy notice that will be necessary for Brexit. Chances are we're going to need to make amendments to the cookie policy because we're expecting some new guidance from the ICO in the next few weeks. There's going to be a Brexit checklist, a lead authority checklist. If you don't know what that's all about, watch the Brexit webinar because we discussed it in that. There's going to be a revised data inventory, which again will be required for Brexit, an amended processor agreement, which will be required for Brexit, an EU representative checklist, a UK representative checklist. There's the webinars and recordings that we're doing every month, updates on the updates on the progress of the e-privacy regulations, which is the PCR stuff. We'll be putting the IAB framework in there for those of you who are doing using any third-party cookies and are more heavily into the internet marketing. An audit checklist, I think that'll be really important for if the ICO audits you. A revised privacy notice with CCPA wording in for when that comes into force. So if you have data subjects, you know, i.e. prospects or customers in the state of California, you'll need certain wording for that. So we'll add that in. And Privacy Shield wording for Brexit. Again, if you're not familiar what the changes are there, watch the Brexit webinar. So lots to be added, and that's just with stuff that I know about at the moment. So it will be an ongoing process of making sure that this is all kept up to date. Let me see. If a person has 3 businesses, I assume they would need to pay 3 three fees and run it separately in relation to GDPR. And yes, if you're talking about the controller charge, yes, it's 3 fees. If you're talking about my pack, if you've got a couple of businesses, then I'm more than happy for you to use pay once and use it for both businesses. If you've got like 20 businesses or you've got a franchise, then I'm not happy to do that. And you can just contact me and we can discuss a specific arrangement for that, okay? Right, what else? I'm so sorry we've gone way over time here, guys. Thanks for the vast majority of you for staying on. Let me see. Okay, I'm going to just look at the questions. Oh my goodness, 26 questions. Right. Where is the Brexit webinar? That is one actually that I put for free in the group, in the Facebook group. So if you search Brexit webinar recording, it'll pop up there. It's also been added to the Legal Academy membership. How close are the EU to updating e-privacy? And is there any word as to how this might be used in the UK post-Brexit? Yep. So I'm going to be doing a separate webinar on that, Ian. But in summary, we don't know how close they are because there's huge lobbying and the council are listening to the lobbyists. The Parliament are very determined that privacy should be much stronger. I don't know is the answer. I think we'll see it in the next year. It'll probably take a year or two to come into force, and the UK will absolutely reflect that in our regulations. I'm sure of that. If you don't renew at the renewal date, will it still be £6.42? Nope. That is special renewal pricing. So if you renew before your membership expires, then it's £6.42 a month. Or £77, it is payable in one fee, but that's what it works out to over 12 months. If you don't renew and then you decide that you want to renew at a later date, then it will be £197 for the pack, and then you get 12 months free updates with that. So really best to renew now. Eric, I've seen your private note, or well, I think it's everyone can see it maybe, but yes, absolutely. Just can you PM me, please, Eric? Because I'll never remember to do that with everything else. Just PM me. I'll be happy to do that. Sophie says, if we have a client who has signed a health consent form, how long is this consent? Okay. General questions like that, Sophie. If you want to just post it in the Facebook group and tag me, I'll reply in there. How does the subscription work? Is it a monthly payment or one-off payment? It is one-off. Just faffing about with monthly payments for £6 a month is just too, it doesn't work for my business. So it is a one-off payment. Jules Spencer Smith, if you can post that in the Facebook group and tag me as well. I think that's more of a general question. Sophie says, what happens if there's just one of you and you go off on maternity leave in terms of responding to requests and reporting breaches? Yeah, unfortunately, Sophie, you've still got to comply. So I would, keep half an eye on your emails, check it. You've got 30 days to comply with data subject requests. So I'd be checking that at least once a week. Or on your, I was going to say you could have a separate address for on your privacy notice, so that if people do want to raise a data subject issue, then you'll only have a small number of emails to check through. But that doesn't really solve the problem, because if they chose not to communicate with you through that email address, then you'd still be expected to reply to it. So I would just keep an eye on your emails for that. S. Phillips says, do you know whether the ICO has any appetite to address, actually, let me just, do you know whether the ICO has any appetite to address all the non-compliant cookie and tracker sticker practices that are prevalent in the UK? Yeah, we're waiting for their new cookie guidance. So I'm keeping a watching brief on that, and we'll do a video and report in the Facebook group when that comes out, because I agree that there is a lot of non-compliance in that area. Melanie says, is there a time limit as to how long a breach that has been notified lasts? Can they come back, say, 5 years later? Do you mean the people who've been affected by it? Yes, well, let me think. You've generally got 6 years to bring a contractual claim. But what would this be? This would be, I guess, I don't know how long the limitation statute would be for this, actually. But yes, in theory, it's not like, you know, they've got to have made a claim within a month and that's it. It can, you know, it can certainly hang over you. Eric says, can processor agreements be part or included with the normal terms of service of the data processor? Must it be a completely separate agreement? Yes, it can be included in the same agreement as long as you've got those minimum mandatory terms in there. In the pack, there is some standalone processor clauses that can be inserted into a wider commercial agreement. So yes, the answer is yes to that. What was the illegal video surveillance? I don't know, actually. Let me write a little note. I can post a bit more about that. If a lot of these you only get the headlines, it's very hard unless you read Austrian to be able to work it out. So I don't know is the answer. Right, I'll see if I can dig anything out though. I want to know whether emailing to my connections on LinkedIn is a possible breach. No. Watch the video on prospecting that is in the GDPR group. Eric says, does the controller fee apply to US companies? I think the answer is no. I think it's just UK, but I will post in the group if that's not the right answer. Oops. Hang on, right. Right. I should have been answering these as I should have been marking them as answered rather than not. I've lost track of where I am now. Okay, Ben says, what happens when the government loses people's data with the ICO? But the ICO do find a lot of government institutions. So if you look through their list of actions, you'll see that they have fined a lot of health authorities and a lot of police, whatever the word for police is, police authorities, I suppose. So they are not shy in doing so. The problem is, of course, is that really those fines are paid for by the public purse. So you and I are actually paying those fines. I actually personally think that they should be making the individuals involved personally accountable for that. Louise says, are there any insights on how other continents feel about Europe having GDPR and its impact on trading? I've heard some thoughts from Silicon Valley. Yeah, certainly I think a lot of the big US companies feel that the US needs to have a federal regulation like GDPR. In terms of how their business that's being done with Europe has been affected, I don't know the answer to that. Barbara says, if someone sends us unencrypted information, should we tell them that it's unacceptable or is it up to them? Yeah, if it's your private data and particularly if it's sensitive data, then yeah, tell them. Remind them that they're probably, you know, in breach of GDPR. Karen says, I'm working with a US-based hotel. Who would address any issues with them? Would it be the ICO? Okay, so yeah, so that's a wider topic than we've got time for now, but you need to work out who is the relevant authority, and really it's so they will have a lead authority. Well, they should have chosen a representative within a certain jurisdiction where they've got a number of data subjects. If they haven't got one, then I'd suggest you tell them to get one. And then typically the main regulator will be where that representative is chosen. But certainly, if, as we saw with Aggregate IQ, if they are dealing with individuals' data who are based in the UK, then the ICO can take that up with them if they are not doing what they're supposed to be doing in relation to the data of people in the UK. Right, where's my cursor here? Right. Nigel, right, we've replied about LinkedIn connections. Richard says, I wonder what the level of awareness is regarding the direct complaints reporting form on the ICO website. Yeah, don't know. I suspect not many people know about it, but it's more that, Richard, I think in terms of adverse publicity, that you know, if it is relevant to a sector or it's an interesting case, then it will get reported in the more wider mainstream press, is the risk. Right, cursor's playing up. I think it's had enough. Asif says, I run a small law firm in London, and part of the Lexel accreditation requires GDPR policies being in place. Apart from the privacy policy and a cookie policy, what other policies will I require? If you, well, there is a number more documents that you will need. It's not just about the, you know, GDPR compliance isn't just about certain policies being in place. I think if you need to know that, then I'd recommend that you buy my pack and go through the different video trainings that will help you with that. Okay, I think that is it on that front. Let me go back to the chat box and see what I've missed over here. Dennis says, throughout the US, there are many emerging regulations by state. Yes, absolutely. Whilst these are subsets of GDPR, these are just the beginnings of these in the States. Yes, absolutely. And I think that certainly what the bigger businesses want is one composite law across all states, rather than having to comply with the slightly different laws across states. Thank you, Paul, for joining. Got to go. Thank you for, I know we've way gone on. Okay, so Sharon says, how do I renew at £77? I can only see a link for 197. I haven't received a renewal email. Renewal due late April. We'll send you a renewal email a week before. So just keep an eye out for that. And if we haven't emailed you and you can't get access to the site, then email us and we'll sort that out. Okay, I think we're going to wrap that up here. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you found that useful. Please do go and share this information at your networking meetings. And because, you know, I don't know whether I feel sorry for the businesses that aren't engaging with this, or whether I wish them all that's coming to them. I'm not entirely sure which camp I fall into, but it's actually, you know, it's not hard to comply really when you've got the resources that I'm offering available. And ongoing compliance is really not as hard as people might think. So why take the risk is my view. But do share. I don't think you can share this actual video outside of the membership site, but do certainly share the content with people that you know. Do, if you feel like it, if you think I'm good at this kind of stuff, direct them my way. Tell them about the Facebook group. Tell them about my pack, and you know, let's have every small business working to GDPR compliance and respecting people's personal data. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here. And I will see you on my next webinar, which is likely to be the last week of April. Not sure what it is yet. I'll post it in the Facebook group. Thanks for being here. Tell all your friends and have a brilliant Thursday. I'm off skiing next week, so hopefully won't be breaking a leg or anything like that, and we'll be back in situ just after Easter. So thank you again, and yeah, it's been great.